So this is my first time in Zibby's bookstore. There's an apostrophe S.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's get that right. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Zibby's.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's where we are.
Yeah.
You also seem to know that already, and so it's exciting.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
Welcome to Southern.
Awesome.
Welcome to Southern California.
Thank you. I just arrived today.
Wow.
Yeah.
So impressions, do you want to sum up the whole state?
Well, I mean, it's not like I haven't been here before, you know.
Right, you did go to college
in California. So not,
So you're an
here.
expert.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
My
I haven't written like a book that's iconic about LA like you have, but
My favorite thing as an ex-New Yorker is reading the New York Times because they like to weigh in on things in Los Angeles in a very serious way with absolutely no expertise.
Okay.
Those are the best.
Yep, absolutely.
So I wanted to start with my first question. It's very penetrating.
Okay.
Are you ready for it?
Okay.
So how are you?
Well, actually that's a hard question.
Well, you've been traveling a lot.
I have.
It's a great time to be Angie Kim because you have had, like I've never seen actually a book with this many blurbs on the back,
Okay, can we just talk about the fact that you actually sent in a blurb?
I did. I don't think I made it.
Here.
I was too late.
No, you were too late. So what happened was we had these blurbs and then there were a couple of people and my editor sent me your blurb and he said, this is what Gabrielle Zevin said about Happiness Falls. And I said, I'm sorry, are you kidding? And he said, why would I be kidding? And I said, because I've told you that Gabrielle Zevin wrote my first favorite book of the last year. Tomorrow. And he was like, yes, but she.
And then he was like, I am kidding.
And then no. And then I was like, do you think that she just said that and she's just lying that she read the book? And he was like, why would she why would she be lying? And I was like, again,
he could feel that about me, that I was just trying to like game you so we could end up here in Santa Monica and then I could drop the bomb. I didn't read it. This is gonna be
right. Now you say it in front of this crowd, and it's being streamed live.
It's gonna be a super awkward event now.
All right.
No, in fact, I did read it. And I'm ready to talk about it. But you didn't answer the question. How are you?
So I think I'm good. I just had a lovely vodka martini with cheese stuffed olives with Joel Stein, who is a friend of mine from college, and my husband, who has said, I've seen like 4 or 5 of these and I'm not gonna come to this event because it's the space is just too crowded.
Right. So he feels like he knows what you're going to say.
He in fact does, probably, because I actually used him as a sound, as a soundbite person, right? So he probably does. But in any case, but I'm actually doing great here because I'm with you.
Yeah.
And as I told you, I don't care how many people come to this because people were like, oh, here's the thing about California. I don't know, like the events in California are really, really hard. Like sometimes like nobody comes. And I was like, you know what? It doesn't matter.
I mean, I said that to you.
You did. You in fact did.
Yeah.
But other people said it too.
Right. So it was confirmed.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was like, I don't care because as long as I get to talk to you about this book, that's like my thing about all of these events is that I feel like as long as I'm actually getting to talk to the people who are like some of my favorite authors about, my own book, that is awesome. And that's what I wanted to do. So as long as I'm getting to talk to you, that's awesome. And then I see like so many amazing people in the audience. So I'm very, very happy. And thank you so much for being here. So despite the traffic and despite the ridiculousness, apparently that is LA. So
yeah. So it's hard to talk about the book without spoiling it.
Yeah.
But I think, are we going to be spoiler free tonight?
I think we have to.
I think we have to be
for people who haven't read. Yeah.
For those people who are very behind.
Yes. Very, very, very behind. Like some people I know.
But so like the bare bones of the story.
Yes.
Well, you were going to read from the beginning. Well, that sets up something else. I will just say what the bare bones of the story are. Okay. Sure. So this is the story of Adam, who goes missing while on a walk with his neurodivergent son, non-speaker Eugene, and how his family tries to find him. The story is told from the perspective of Mia. and who is Eugene's older sister, and she's clever and a bit discursive and into footnotes, and it's a missing person story, but it's equally a story about language, and that's why I loved it so much. Because when I read the book, I thought, I cannot read another missing person story where you find some like lady in a shallow like canal somewhere and that kind of thing. And then I was so excited that this is really a book about language just as much as it is about missing people. So the center of the story is a biracial family, and we'll get into all of that later. And you're going to read a little bit from the book. I brought a book.
Yes, I did not.
I was prepped for this.
Yes, so. I was not. So I would love to borrow your copy.
Yeah, this is a professional service here.
Yes,
we're right there.
So I'm going to read just a couple of paragraphs from the very beginning. It's from part 1, Everyone's Fine. And, spoiler alert, everyone is not fine, obviously. Chapter 1, Lock, Bach, and K-pop. We didn't call the police right away. I would blame myself, wonder if things might have turned out differently if I hadn't shrugged it off, insisting Dad wasn't missing, but just delayed. Probably still in the woods looking for Eugene, thinking he'd run off somewhere. Mom says it wasn't my fault, that I was merely being optimistic, but I know better. I don't believe in optimism. I believe there's a fine line, if any, between optimism and willful idiocy. So I try to avoid optimism altogether, lest I fall over the line mistakenly. My twin brother John keeps trying to make me feel better too, saying we couldn't have known something was wrong because it was such a typical morning, which is an asinine thing to say, because why would you assume things can't go wrong simply because they haven't yet? Life isn't geometry. Terrible, life-changing moments don't happen predictably at the bottom of a linear slope. Tragedies and accidents are tragic and accidental precisely because of their unexpectedness. Besides, labeling anything about our family typical, I just have to shake my head. I'm not even thinking about the typical adjacent stuff like John's and my boy-girl twin thing, our biracial mix, Korean and white, untraditional parental gender roles, working mom, stay-at-home dad, or different last names. Parson for dad plus Park for mom equals the mashed up Parkson for us kids. Not common, certainly, but hardly shocking in our area these days. Where we're indubitably, inherently atypical is with my little brother Eugene's dual diagnosis, autism and a rare genetic disorder called mosaic Angelman syndrome, which means he can't talk, has motor difficulties, and, this is what fascinates many people who've never heard of Angelman, has an unusually happy demeanor with frequent smiles and laughter.
So the first lines of the book, they're so great. We didn't call the police right away. Like, we should all just say that. It sounds really good. We didn't call the police right away. And I wondered, like, did you start with those lines, or did you come to those lines later?
So this family has been with me for about 13 years now. So I wrote, I started
almost like real people, in other words.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like they are
like real people. They really were. So that's what happened. So I started writing in my 40s. Writing was my 5th career after I did a whole bunch of other things. And one of the first short stories I ever wrote was about this family in Mia's perspective, except that she was 14 years old. And it was a magical realism short story about these twins that are going around this graveyard outside Seoul, trying to look for their non-speaking little brothers' lost voice, literally in the ground, using a stethoscope, like using it, like to try to listen. And Mia is a musician, so she was like looking for the differences in the pitches and things like that to try to figure out where his voice that they believe they robbed him of seeped into the ground. So that was one of my first short stories that I ever wrote. So this family has been with me. Mia's voice has been with me. And then my own kids, I have 3 boys. And so the youngest is 15, my oldest is 20. When my 2 older boys were going through college and all that kind of stuff, I would be like, I wonder what's happening with Mia and John, who's her twin. Like, I wonder what colleges they're applying to and what, essays they're writing about. And I bet Mia's getting into more colleges than John is. And I wonder if that's creating rifts, almost like they were real people. So that was what was happening. And I did a lot of sort of like, free writing and things like that. And then at the end, like it was really in June of 2020 that I started writing this story in earnest. And when I started writing the story in earnest that first day, maybe about an hour into free writing, that line came to me. We didn't call the police right away. And I knew immediately that that was going to be the first line. It intrigued me, but more than that, it was that tone of regret. She obviously regrets something that happened. And what was that? I didn't know. And I wanted to know. And I also didn't know, like, she has so many ideas about what could have been and sort of, what might have been if she had done things, a little differently. And so that really stayed with me. And that more than even just the hook of the mystery element of that line.
Right, because it's a great first line because you ask the question, well, why didn't they call the police right away?
Right.
So why didn't they call the police right away?
Well, they didn't call the police right away because Mia, the narrator, is kind of, she was not being she thought that she knew everything that was going on. And this is my problem with my 20-year-olds who are in college right now, is that I don't know if any of you guys have experienced this, but they really feel like they know everything. And Mia is such a know-it-all. And she is so cynical and skeptical, but at the same time, she's just so enamored with her own intellectual sort of vivacity and curiosity. And so it's wonderful being in her head because it makes me more curious intellectually. But at the same time, it does make me feel like, oh, Mia, like you really, girl, you really don't know everything, so please, just like you need to grow up. So a lot of the story is a coming of age story for her and for the whole family as a whole.
Right. I mean, I think in some ways the book is about, like Tomorrow, the limitations of intellect. Like
Absolutely.
You can be the smartest person in the room and still not be able to negotiate human interactions.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I was so excited about the prospect of you reading this book. Like, seriously, my editor asked me, he was like, who are the people that you would like to blurb? And it's not even about the blurb itself. Like, to me,
I mean, for me, it's about the blurb itself.
Really? You think so? No, I don't think it's about that.
I actually had a book once that had no blurbs, and it feels so sad and empty on the back.
Does, yeah.
People are like, is this a bad book?
No.
Or does she just not have any friends?
No.
Which is it?
No. But you know what it is? To me, it's less about the actual like blurb itself and more about like, I want this author to read it because I kind of like am hopeful that like, I was like, I'm really hopeful that if Gabrielle Zevin reads this book, that she's going to love Mia. Like, I really felt like you would, and maybe you wouldn't have, maybe you would have hated her, but still like, and maybe you would have just been nice and been like, this is a great book or something, but I really wanted, there were certain people, certain authors who have written books that I feel like their characters would probably like be friends with my characters in real life. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I feel like we're entering a new kind of age with storytelling, especially when you're looking at biracial people in stories.
Yes.
And so I think that's a thing that both of our books share.
Yes.
I think, and this is something that was supposed to happen later in our conversation. We're going to build toward this, but we can be right there now.
Yes, we can totally do it.
I think there was a time when if you told a story about a biracial family, the only subject of that story could be the fact that they were biracial, and it is difficult to be biracial in the world.
Yes.
And in a sense, I think race is certainly very important in this story and in my story, but it isn't necessarily, they aren't stories about race.
No.
Though I read somewhere where you kind of had said that a thing about your first two books is that they both are sort of about race in a way. So I wondered, how much do you see Happiness Falls as a novel about race?
I mean, I do think that a lot of it is about race, although I think it's less about race per se and more about the things that come with race. So for me, less about the fact that I'm Asian American and more about the fact that I moved here as a Korean American, as
Right.
an immigrant.
It's funny because my mom moved
I know you
from
told
Korea
me.
when she was 9, and you moved when you were 11.
When I was 11.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and so it's actually kind of a similar story. And
Totally.
so something that really resonated with me in your book was, and it's actually the subject of the book, so anyone who has read it, I assume it resonates with you as well, is the way in which we think if somebody is challenged in language in some way that they are actually unintelligent.
Exactly. And that to me is the biggest thing that I hope people take away from this book, is the fact that when I was 11, I, went overnight from feeling like a pretty smart girl who was doing well in classes in Korea, lots of friends, all that kind of stuff, to all of a sudden no longer speaking the language and being completely isolated and cut off. And I knew that that would feel frustrating. My parents had said, look, listen, you're going to not speak the language. It's going to feel bad and all that kind of stuff. What I did not expect was that it would go deeper to shame. I felt embarrassed about not being able to speak the language, which I didn't realize until that time, that we as a society have this deeply, deeply ingrained assumption that equates oral fluency with intelligence.
Yes.
And I had that within me. So when I couldn't speak the language, I felt stupid. I felt like a pabo. Is that a term that you've heard your mom say?
No.
By the way? Okay.
Yeah.
Pabo is a term in Korean that means, a stupid person. And so I felt like that for the first time. And it really did a number on my sort of sense of security. I'm one of like the most insecure people that I know. And I'm like 50 something years old. It's been over 40 years since this happened to me. And it still has stuck with me how much I felt this. I just felt stripped of intelligence, of the sense of just competence, as like a human being. And so this is something that has really, really stayed with me. And I feel like it's something that for somebody like Eugene, who can't speak because of a lifelong thing. So what I went through is nothing compared to what characters like and real people, some of whom are in the audience tonight, go through because of a lifelong disorder, medical condition, anything like that. What I went through was nothing, because I went through it in a limited way for a couple of years in one language only. And it still had this huge impact on me. So when I learned about people like Eugene, who, have this lifelong condition and who are presumed to be cognitively deficient, and yet actually have all of these words that are locked inside themselves, I knew that I had to write about that. Yeah. So that's really what's at the core of this book and the story.
Yeah, and I thought what is so interesting, if we take a second to talk about Eugene's mother, Hannah.
Yes.
And she, like you and like my mom, was born in Korea.
Yeah.
But she becomes a linguist, which is really fascinating. And she's basically a Chomskyite. Can we say it that way?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So she believes that language is innate.
Yes.
And so in a sense, when her son is born with this intersection of autism and Angelman's, he, I think, proves basically he challenges all of her theories about life. And so I guess my question for you is, how much does like the birth of a child always challenge one's philosophical theories about life?
Absolutely. I think it does. As the mother of 3 boys who challenge all of my assumptions about life on a daily basis, I think that happens all the time. But I think here it goes to the core of Hannah, the mother's perspective about sort of everything that she's been thinking about her entire life. I mean, she is a linguist, but she's not just a Chomskyite, but she's also, like one of she interned for the guy whose name I can't recall, even though it's in the footnote in this book, who created the Klingon and Vulcan languages and, things like that. So, so if you're a fan of TNG, and especially, I feel like I've been talking about the episode Darmok a lot lately. So, things like that. So the mom is very, very into things like that, but she definitely believes that language is innate. So she believes that language is in her son, and it just kind of is killing her that she cannot find a way in.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the frustrations of parenthood. And it's funny because this Happiness Falls is written entirely from the perspective of the 20-year-old sibling of Eugene, Mia. And unlike Miracle Creek, my first novel, which was written from seven different POVs, and that was very much an exploration of parenting sacrifice. So really looking at things from the parenting angle, and Happiness Falls instead is looking at it just from the angle of the sibling and of the child himself. And, so in those ways, I feel like they're kind of companion pieces of each other is how I've been sort of describing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
So going to the other parent for a second, something that really fascinated me is that I would describe this book as being about two missing people.
Yes.
But we'll talk about the one that's on the surface first, which is Adam.
Yeah.
And so I thought this was a fascinating character to be a missing person. I wondered how you arrived at the stay-at-home dad who is a caregiver as a missing person, because that is just not, he's not a blonde, nubile,
exactly female yes,
who's going to look great in a creek.
Exactly. Absolutely. So this is the thing about missing person stories that has, and I have lots of friends who write mysteries and things like that, and we kind of make fun of it, like this trope of the missing person. And of course, they're always girls or women. And, and if there is an element of domestic suspense, there's an element of being sick of your family and wanting to run away and things like that. And it really did fascinate me. I was like, well, what happened if it's a man who is missing? And there are lots of, plenty of missing person stories that are where the missing person is a man. But when I was kind of serving them, and I kind of made this spreadsheet. I'm very into spreadsheets, as Mia is, and as Adam is. And so I was making the spreadsheet, and I was like, wow, all of the missing person stories where it's the guy who's the missing guy. It's a mafia related story, or it's international espionage and spy and whatever. And I was like, what if it's a man? And what if it's a stay-at-home father? Then is it going to be oh, well, maybe he was sick of the kids and he ran away, which is always the thing that people say about mothers when they go missing.
Yeah.
And so I really thought, you know what? I really want to sort of play with this. And the other thing that really just drives me crazy about these missing person tropes and these stories is how in real life, 90% of them are never resolved, right? They're not solved. And that's the frustrating thing about it. That's what makes it so hard. And yet in 90%, probably 98% of these missing person stories that are told on TV and movies and novels, they're neatly resolved. You get some kind of an epilogue that shows exactly what happened to the missing person the moment they went missing. And it just kind of drives me crazy a little bit. So I was happy to be able to, write a story that kind of challenges that a little bit.
Although I think, if you haven't read it yet, you are satisfied in the end.
I hope so.
I was satisfied by it.
Yeah.
Though I am a person comfortable with ambiguity.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing. But
I think actually what you're saying is that a satisfying thing is often not satisfying because it doesn't actually feel like it has human or truth in it.
Well, but I think it has. I think the thing about things that are ambiguous is that is sort of what life is. Tana French wrote this amazing essay for Time magazine in the introduction to the 100 best mysteries and thrillers or whatever. And what she said was mysteries are you can divide them into two. the one kind of mystery is one in which you start with a disruption, with chaos, right? Because that's what crime does. Like whenever you have crime, you have like a disruption and things are like put into disorder. And then the rest of the narrative is about how to put the pieces back together into this logical, neat puzzle, kind of like thing. And I do think that my first novel, Miracle Creek, was more like that. It had 7 different narratives. You got clues from the different POVs and you kind of put them together. And there is kind of like this confession and you find out what happened at the end. And then she said, and then the other kind of mystery is one in which you have this messiness, this disorder, and then you find out how the characters actually cope with that. Like how they make sense of it, how they choose to go on, all of those things. And I sort of thought, that's what I'm doing here. Like, that's what I'm attempting to do, because to me, that was the most important and exciting thing about missing person narratives, are how hard they are for the people who are going through it, because you don't know anything. It could be that your dad ran away with some mistress, and he is now in like Fiji somewhere having a grand old time. Or it could be that he is being completely tortured to death right now, a mile from where you're sitting, and you have no idea. And often the only person who knows what happened for real is the person who's missing.
Right.
So it's this conundrum, and it's how do you make sense of that? That was so interesting to me. And how do you go on? So to me, this story it's a missing person mystery, yes, but it's actually more than that. It is a coming of age story for Mia and for the whole family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really how this family is going to learn to communicate, because in a sense, the way you are introduced them at the beginning, they're all in these very separate pods, and they learn to really speak to each other.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in a sense, that mystery is resolved.
Yes, exactly. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's why,
which is the important one.
I think so.
Well, I guess for them, both are important. I mean, it is their dad.
So. It is their dad, but they do have
But for me as the reader, I'm not related to Adam. I was more like,
right. Well,
I'm kidding.
No, but to me, when I sold this novel on the first 60 pages, which I did not do with my debut. And that was really, really hard, because I did worry a lot about, like, am I going to satisfy my editor who doesn't know what happens at the end? Because he asked me when he bought it, he was like, what happens to the father? And I was like, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't even know if we're going to find out what happens to the father. Probably not, like, completely. And I remember him at some point saying, I wonder if I wonder if we're going to actually like find out exactly what happens to him, or if that's like something that we actually even need to know. And I sort of thought, I don't know that we need to know. And what I told him, I remember at that time, and this was in this like 3-page pitch letter that I sort of that accompanied the 60 pages, was, it's that feeling like, remember that movie Inception? It was kind of like a good role model. Like, you find out something, like the story is resolved, but then there's like a little opening that tells you, like, yes, the resolution that you thought happened may not be real. Like, it may be a construct. And but the character decides, you know what, I'm okay with this being a narrative.
I want to say I got to the end and I felt like conclusively I knew.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. But now I want to know what you think.
But
we'll talk after.
I think that's what readers do. I think you make the narrative as well.
Exactly.
It's not always that the narrative is there. You have to participate in that in some way. But going back to something you said like 2 minutes ago, and then it just passed by.
What?
No, I was just thinking, like, I feel the same way about mysteries. I think we all have a sort of Law and Order sense of what mystery is going to be like. But if you think about cops, we always say, when you're kind of watching something that's true crime, like a documentary, you're always thinking, wow, these cops are so hapless, But in fact, they aren't being shown insert shots of what to look at.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think your book captures some of that you don't know where to look necessarily.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think we're heading toward the end of questions. I have one more.
Ooh.
I actually had about 50 more. You know, and now we'll never know. They'll just die right here. Like,
well, you can send it to me.
I've way over prepared. There were so many. There were so many.
It's so great.
Okay, so
You're
something
so
that intrigued me about you
Yeah.
is that you went to Interlochen and studied acting.
Yes.
And then I read something else about you where you described yourself as a method writer.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you would talk a bit about what it is to be a method writer.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that.
Well, we're in Los Angeles, and I think method writing could really play here.
Yeah.
You know,
and
a seminar even.
Yeah. No. And also the other cool thing is that, you know, my youngest son, who's 15, who's a high school freshman, he just started at Interlochen at my alma mater. So that's really, really cool. Even though he's a musician, he thinks like acting is very strange, which is exactly what I thought about writing. I remember like thinking these people who are writers at Interlochen when I was like 14, 15, like I was like, why would anybody want to write for a living? Like that just seemed so strange to me. So I was a performer, and then I was told, you know, you really probably shouldn't go into acting because, you know, this was in the 80s.
Yeah, much like Anna Lee actually in Tomorrow. There's about four roles for her.
Totally. Yes, exactly. So they were like, yeah, you shouldn't, that's not very practical. And so we hear that you're like good at academics, so why don't you go do that? And then I was like, what would be something in academics that is like kind of like acting? And I was like, oh, it would be like being a litigator, like, you know, like those lawyers that you see on TV going like objection and
I can really see that for you, by the way. Yeah. But also in a show about a lawyer on TV.
Yes, that would be
both
great.
of those things.
About like a 50-something woman. Yes. That would be great. So
cool. Moonlights as a novelist.
That would be awesome.
And is also fighting crime and all that.
Yeah. That would be very, very cool. So I feel like when I started writing, I was like desperately trying to sort of bring in everything that I had done before. And so the way that I write is this, it's kind of like method acting. It's like method writing where I try to stay in the character's perspective. So when I was doing Miracle Creek, it was, 7 different characters. Each chapter was a different character. So let's say each chapter took me like 3 months to write. Then at the end of the 3 months, I would be like, okay, I can like now go to a totally different person's perspective, which was kind of freeing in some ways, which I don't know how you would feel about that. I'd love to hear your process thoughts too. But for me, it was really freeing to be able to go to somebody else and like spend like a good week just free writing, pacing, and sort of like acting out what I think that their voices were like and things like that, and how they were thinking. And with this book, I was just in Mia's head the entire time for like 3 years, which was hard because Mia is, as a narrator, she's a lot. She is very intense. Like we talked about, she's cynical. She has a lot of skeptical. She is hyperlexic.
I felt like even if you hadn't wanted to put footnotes in the book, Mia wouldn't have let you not.
She
put
wouldn't
the
have,
footnotes,
exactly. No, I actually was like, oh, footnotes, I don't know. And
but
then
Mia was like, she would want them.
She would, exactly. It was like she was just like, no, this is the way I think, damn it. Like, just let me put them in footnotes. And also, I do think that the footnotes, which are in the book, are kind of her way of being sensitive, because she knows that there are people in this world that don't like asides, and that don't like, like her mom. Like her mom is like, focus, Mia, focus. And so she's like, all right, you know what? I'm going to put my asides in footnotes so that people who don't like them can just skip right over them.
Right.
And so I think it's actually her way of growing a little bit and showing consideration.
Right, of having empathy for somebody beyond herself.
Exactly.
This may not be interesting to you.
Exactly. Right. So therefore, I will put it in that way. Unless you're listening to the audiobook, in which case, like, you can zone out a little bit, but you're going to have to, like, nothing we can do about that.
She couldn't imagine that. she didn't know there would be an audiobook.
No, she probably doesn't know that this would be
That
like
this is
an
a book at
actual
all.
book at all.
And
Exactly.
also, by the way, she comes from footnote people, so that was sort of an inevitability.
Well, one person. I think her dad. Her mom is not really.
She seems a little footnote person to me.
You think so? Just because you're saying that because she's a PhD in linguistics.
I am, and I'm thinking that goes with footnotes.
Yeah.
So is that an unfair assumption?
No. I think that's probably fine. I think probably Noam Chomsky would be very into footnotes.
Yeah. Well, so I'd never heard anybody describe themselves as a method writer before.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I am one, but I do know that I used to start writing characters too soon.
Yeah.
You know, like that really, if you think about it, sometimes when you read a book, it feels as if people are trying to get to know the writer is trying to get to know the character as they write. But if you are more of a method writer, you might have, say, learned quite a bit about that character before you actually arrived in that moment.
I think you have
a Grotowskian writer, even.
Oh,
you know, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway,
I mean, I think that for me, I need to know so much about the character.
Same. Yeah.
Not necessarily about their background, you know, or like.
No, it's deeper than that.
It's deeper,
you know, because
exactly.
You can read a book that has, you know, so many like things on it.
Yes.
You know, like that person likes ice cream and they wear polka dots, and it's not meaningful in any way. It doesn't matter.
That has nothing to do with it. It's not about like the stories. It's really more about their voice and the way that they think. And the way that they process their emotions and their thoughts and their stories.
Yeah.
You know, and for me, you know, even though Happiness Falls and Miracle Creek have mystery elements, I think of the mystery elements as more like a Trojan horse that, you know, I use to pull readers in. And then once you're kind of pulled in and you're like, oh, I want to know what happened to the father. And so I'm going to keep on turning the pages, that I'm just like, let me unleash some of these like stories that may or may not be completely related to that plot line, you know?
I feel like I want to ask you one more question.
Yeah, of course.
On the same subject, which is, do you feel like you were able to choose Mia as a narrator, or did she choose you?
I mean, I don't think she would have let me have this book without her as a narrator, in the sense that at one point I actually called my editor and I was like, this narrator is kicking my butt. She is just she's so much that I just can't, like, I'm exhausted just dealing with her. And I was like, I just don't know.
You were like, wouldn't John the brother be a perfect
Exactly.
Good point
That's what I said.
Yeah.
I said that. I actually
reasonable.
said, I was like, you know what? I think that maybe we should go back and forth. Like, maybe I'll go to the mom. And he was like, you know, listen, it's your book. It's your story. You can do whatever you want with it. But he was like, I feel like Mia just really wants like, you know, be heard throughout the whole thing. And I really thought that was really interesting, because I thought about it and I thought, you know, one of the things about missing person stories is that it is frustrating, right? It is frustrating because you don't know what happened to the person who went missing. And so in one sense, escaping to a different POV and trying to get somebody else's perspective is actually a cop-out.
Yeah.
You know, and
it lets you out of this mystery.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
It's funny. It reminds me that I read somewhere, I think it was just like a reader review describing Mia as an unreliable narrator.
Yes.
And I was like, I find her very reliable.
Me too.
You know, so I wondered how you experienced her. Because if anything, the footnotes and such suggest the extent to which she is deeply wanting to tell you the truth.
Absolutely.
She's unreliable insofar as we are all unreliable narrators of our stories.
Exactly.
But,
she doesn't mean to be unreliable. She wants desperately to be reliable, and she desperately wants to be somebody who is, I mean, in fact, I think she would take umbrage at that. Like,
she'd be like, are you calling me a liar?
Yes.
I've been trying so hard to tell you the truth.
Exactly. Like, I even have like footnotes to tell you.
Did you not see the footnotes?
Exactly. Like, are you not getting who I am? And no, absolutely. So I don't think it's that she's unreliable. It's just that she is, I think, so filled with regret that she sometimes can get caught up in this over-analysis cycle.
Yeah.
Where she is like, let me look at this from all different angles to try to justify to everyone else and to myself what I did and how I could have made things better or worse or different or whatever.
Well,
you
I
know?
mean, the proof of her reliability, and we won't get into it because we're supposed to be done, is the cake incident, you know, because which I think is one of the most kind of like moving and kind of, you know, harrowing parts of the book, you know, like she goes out of her way to tell you how terrible she is.
Yes.
And then has to then correct her telling of the story. You know, now that's quite reliable. When I read this unreliable thing, I kind of wondered if it was just a sort of sexism where we call female narrators unreliable.
Yeah, well, I think that's really, really interesting. And I actually thought something like that, maybe not like necessarily sexism thing, but more like just, do we think that anybody who is really trying to be raw and confessional, like, do we think that they're being unreliable because people aren't that thoughtful usually, maybe?
Right. They're like, who are you talking to?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
But she doesn't know. She's figuring out the story with all of us.
Exactly. So she is trying to figure it out. And also the other thing about her is that I think she's really hard on herself. So to the extent that she's unreliable, I think it's that she is harder on herself than the rest of us would be.
Yeah.
And so in a way, I think she overemphasizes the things that she did wrong and the ways in which she is she's just not like a good person, you know, in her from a morality perspective. I'm trying to like say things without giving things away, which is hard. But I think that that's where she is kind of unreliable, in that she just like goes a little too hard on herself because that's how she feels.
And some of it is, I think, about her role in the family. And we won't have any time to talk about this, so I don't know why I'm bringing it up. But so much of the book, I think, is about, and it's a smaller part of Tomorrow, but about the drama of having a child who has needs.
Yes.
And how that kind of takes up the energy and becomes the focus point of this entire family.
Absolutely. You know? And also, like, when you see that happening with somebody you love, how resentful you feel about that, but at the same time then you feel guilt over that,
right?
And so it just becomes this like cycle that feeds upon itself. So
I guess we'll toss it out to one or two questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Hello.
So you made Detective Janice female. Was that a decision, or was that just something that flowed out of the writing?
That's so interesting. I think it just flowed out of the writing. I knew that she was always going to be a female detective. I think mainly because I see so many male detectives, and I think I kind of wanted to do something that was a little different from that. And also because there's a detective in my first novel, Miracle Creek, that I sort of thought that she would be. And so to the point where I actually had her be this female detective. And it just, she was somebody who was like a former social worker and who was, you know, with Child Protective Services. So she seemed like a good person. So I wanted her to be, and a lot of people have written that they think that she is kind of the evil person and who's not,
hence
you know.
Janice,
yes, hence the name Janice, exactly. The like going back, yes, the two-faced and all that kind of stuff. And certainly, you know, Mia thinks of that. But at the same time, I really felt like it was hard for somebody like, you know, like Detective Janice, because her job is to try to find the father, and her job is to try to protect the family and the society. And so she thinks that, you know, Eugene is kind of sort of having these meltdowns in a way that is dangerous for for the family and for society. Like, she is trying to do her job by like arresting him and things like that. I don't think any of these are spoilers, really. So if that's true, then I guess I felt like there was more of a complexity to her than just being sort of a worthy adversary to Mia and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's a really interesting part of the book, their first encounter. I mean, I think you're writing about the difficulty that law enforcement has in dealing with anybody who has difference,
Yeah.
You know, whether that's difference of race or difference of, you know, neurodivergence or whatever that is,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the biggest things, and we haven't even talked about the fact that this is set in COVID.
Yeah. And I had that question. So
right. No, I know. I saw in your
COVID
many
was, we were going to get to COVID.
Yes, there was like a whole section in the outline that you had.
Well, it was definitely, it was a good question.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't going to be a COVID focused event.
Right.
But
no,
I had hoped to arrive.
But I do think that that's one of the things that, so one of the things that this brings up is that I do teach creative writing to 3 groups of non-speakers, most of whom are autistic in real life, who are like Eugene, and they use spelling, like, you know, they point to letters one by one as a way of communicating. And the thing that, you know, Detective Janice and things like that brought up, especially during COVID, is that real life people who are like that, like they had a really, really difficult time because of the disruption to their daily life and their routines and things like that. And then going out in public and having sensory issues, so they couldn't wear masks, you know, like all of these things. And then just the fear that they had every single day whenever they went out. Like, what happens if somebody who's well-meaning, who's a cop or who's a CPS person, like comes and, you know, and tries to sort of interrogate, and then they don't have the words to explain what's happening. And so this kind of a situation that happened in Happiness Falls is something that, like, a lot of people had so many issues with. And so a lot of my non-speaking students, some of them were first readers for this novel, but some of them couldn't get through it for a long time because they were like, it was too real. Like the fear, this situation that you describe in this book is the fear that we were living with, like, every day. So I thought that was really just kind of poignant and something that I had to, like, think about a lot. Yeah.
Yes, with the letterboard in the middle.
So Dan spelled out 2 things. The first was that he thinks the reviewer mixed up the fact that Mia is not always a reliable family member with her not being a reliable narrator.
Yeah.
Good point.
That's a great point.
And his question for you is, how happy do these events make you feel compared to your baseline?
Oh, I love that. Oh, I love that question so much. So the father in the novel, Adam, who's missing, he is obsessed with happiness theories, and he's obsessed with trying to quantify happiness and with trying to maximize it, especially for his family members. And he believes in the relativity of happiness, in which your happiness level is your experience divided by your expectations, or probably more likely your baseline. And so I've actually been thinking about this a lot, because I've been thinking about happiness myself for a long time. And I think that comes from the fact that I'm a Korean immigrant. Back in Korea, we were so poor. We lived in, one room of another family's house, my parents and I, and we didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity, all of those things. And then we came here. When we got the visa to come here as a family, we were told it's like you won the lottery. And it was. And so when we came here, and then we were living with my aunt and uncle and my cousin, and I had my own bedroom for the first time. I had indoor plumbing for the first time, showers, toilets, color TVs, all these things. I remember telling myself I should be happy. I am happy. I need to be happy. Why am I not happy? But I wasn't. And, a lot of it was, of course, the feeling like a pebble because of my because of language and all that kind of stuff. And so I've been thinking about sort of the objective versus subjective levels of happiness and things like that for a long, long time. And the father, when I was thinking about this with respect to Miracle Creek, when it was coming out, my debut novel, I remember thinking like, okay, I'm going to have very low expectations. So the lower the expectations, the higher the numerator, right? The numerator is a constant, but if the expectations are low, then my happiness level is just going to be higher, just numerically. So I tried to keep it, and it was such a bummer because I'm thinking to myself like, okay, I'm going to expect that nobody's going to buy this book and nobody's going to like it, and people are going to give bad reviews, which does make the happiness level higher, but it is such a bummer, which is what
you are living without hope at that point.
Right, exactly.
Let's balance out the low happiness.
Exactly.
Portion,
So because the expectation, that low expectation, is itself an experience. And that's what the father says. And so he says, like, let's go ahead and keep the expectations high, but keep the baseline low.
Yeah.
And so that's what he decides to use as the denominator. And so for this one, I remember the day before it came out, I was holding this book in my hand, the finished copy. And I was like, okay, I'm going to allow myself the silly hopes and dreams, like you have, like it's going to get great reviews and it's going to like hit the list and blah, 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 all these things. But I'm going to remember myself as a baseline. And I think as a writer, your baseline is when you start a story, you have no idea if you're going to be able to finish it. And that's the baseline. And so I was like, you know what, compared to that baseline, the person who didn't know if I was going to ever find like a way to finish the story, let alone hold the finished book in my hand and have it actually be in bookstores and have my favorite author be in conversation with me, all of these things, like that's what the baseline me would have wanted, like remembering to want what you have. Which is something that the father says. So thank you for that question. Yeah, but I've been doing a lot of that.
I feel like no one's going to top this question.
Maybe.
I don't know. Like you're going to have to try.
Maybe one final.
In the back?
Maybe like a few more.
I was wondering, having multiple careers before this. So I'm just curious how you got into writing and what you used to educate yourself, I guess, about writing fiction. And Gabrielle, I'm not sure if you have like a more straightforward path in writing fiction or not. But I'm just curious, like how you got from where you were to being a
Yeah, I feel like you're the more tell us, and then I'll.
I mean, I feel like they're both encouraging stories because they're the opposite story in certain ways.
Yeah.
I was published for the first time 20 years ago. And I was saying to you before the event that I recently, so my last book, Tomorrow, has done really, really well. And I was in Australia doing my 750,000th podcast because you can do a lot of podcasts. And I'm so glad I spent my time in Australia in recording studios. But there was a very charming young woman and she said, "Oh, your book has been so successful. And I have a question, and I think this is something that our listeners will want to know. How do we get there faster? Because it has been 20 years since your first novel has come out."
She said that? That's
she did,
so funny.
But the fact is, like, I wasn't offended by it because it's the exact question I would have had.
Right.
Like, how can I get there faster?
Yeah.
The answer is you cannot get there faster.
No.
Unfortunately, it takes the time it takes. You learn things, you do things, and all of that. And that was the sad, disappointing answer. And I think it's interesting because you have had, do we say 5 careers?
Yes.
5
Absolutely.
careers,
Yes. Yes.
And your first novel was published in your 40s?
Yes.
Or were you,
no, it came out the week I turned 50.
The week she turned 50.
The week I turned 50, yeah.
And in a sense, like, these are journeys that end in the same way. But I think the things that are similar is that we probably read a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
a lot.
And that kind of thing, And so in a sense, there are all these different paths you can take. Like I'm often asked a related question, which is how do you write? And they're looking for some kind of process answer or some way that you can get there faster. And, I think, the joke is always that the first time novelist is kind of like the first year lawyer. No one knows as much about the law.
Yes.
And so when I was a first time novelist, I gave people a lot of answers that were concrete about exactly how you would do it.
Yeah.
But now I've written 10. And they've all been written in all different kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And there is no one way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a terribly sad answer because it doesn't
No,
it doesn't give you action steps
not
really.
at all. No.
Buy that journal.
No, I don't
this
think
retreat,
it's sad.
or whatever it is.
I don't think it's sad at all. In fact, I find it inspiring. And I was telling Gabrielle about this beforehand. I was like, I love that this is your 10th book because it gives you
some
hope.
places it's my debut though.
Yeah, I know they think that
They think that. Yeah.
but it's not. And I love that people think that this is your debut, but in fact it's your 10th, and because it tells you that you need this. It's part of the process. Like you need to just be patient and all of that sort of stuff. And even my process, this is my second novel, but I've had tons of other things that have gone on beforehand that I think without them, I don't think I would have written these books that I've written,
Right.
So I think it's all part of the same process. But yes, but this is, being a writer is my 5th career. And I basically started writing one day because I was so upset about the fact that all 3 of my boys, who are all fine now, are, they had medical mystery kind of ailments, all as babies and as preschoolers. And so I spent a lot of time, like so much time when they were little, doing, cooking, which I hate, grocery shopping, which I cannot stand, fighting with insurance companies, going from doctor to doctor, doing all this medical research. And one day when I was just so completely exasperated, when my husband was away doing some trial or something like that, instead of doing what I should have been doing, which is like making things that wouldn't kill my children who have all different types of allergies from each other, for the next day, I just said, no, I'm just going to put all that away and just start writing, and kind of unloaded, and just the freedom that I felt in that. And then my husband said, hey, you're not just telling your own story, you're telling our whole family's story. And, there's some issues with that, like, medical privacy and insurability. And so why not try fiction? And I was like, fiction? I don't know how to write fiction. And so I started taking classes about writing short stories at, my local, it's called the Writer Center in DC. I'm sure there are many like it in LA. I also took some online classes at Gotham Writing Center, writingclasses.com, like a long time ago, even before we even had Zoom classes. And so doing that, I started with short stories, and I read every craft book about plot and structure, I think, that you can possibly read. I'm kind of a structure and story structure guru. Like I'm very, very into that, into studying it, probably because I'm incapable of actually outlining before I write. So I feel like I need to know it in order to sort of have it in the back of my mind, so that as I'm writing scene by scene, I can sort of like look back iteratively and be like, okay, where am I in the storyline? And so doing it that way. Yeah. All right.
Is that us?
I think so. I think this may be us.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Zibby Books.
Yay. I think it's time.
I think it's time.
Yeah. Here, I want to take a picture of this awesome